This is PIX on Politics Daily with Dan Mannarino.
Hey everybody, welcome to PIX on Politics Daily. It is August 26th. August 26th, big day, by the way. Pumpkin spice lattes return at Starbucks, in case that's your kind of thing. Even though I don't believe that pumpkin spice should come back to after fall. But anyway, this is a politics conversation. So here we are. Last time I spoke to you all, we were discussing Chipgate with Katie Honan, right? Remember, we were talking about the whole potato chip bag and the bribe that was placed in the bag and the race for New York City mayor and what was going on there. There's been a few updates since then, right? Over the weekend in the race for mayor, it was less about policy, more seemingly about strength. Zoran Mamdani did a bench press. He was at an event and he did a bench press and he got some assistance from it. And then Eric Adams did it, and it became this whole thing of like who can lift more. And then Adams went on X and said 64 versus 32 and called him man scrawny rather than Mamdani. And it became a whole thing. And then Andrew Cuomo was giving out potato chips at a press conference saying sometimes potato chips are just potato chips. And all of this is like seemingly not about the issues. It's become name calling. So our James Ford today is actually interviewing Mayor Adams, right? And it's going to come up about some of the language that's now being used and the kind of personal attacks that are less about policy and more about somebody's athletic ability and whatnot. So stay tuned for that interview with James Ford, one-on-one with Mayor Eric Adams later today. Henry Rosloff has the week off, so we're covering the race for mayor in other ways. So stay tuned for that conversation. It's going to be very interesting to see what he has to say. Also, the citywide debates, the Campaign Finance Board just put out their debates. There are two debates in the race for city mayor. They're going to come mid to late October. So stay tuned for those as well. And while all that's going on, of course, then there's what we're doing with the New Jersey governor's race. Don't forget, we had two big events in the final week of September into October. We're doing the lieutenant governor's debate for the state of New Jersey. First time that PIX 11 was ever given a statewide debate. That's going to be on Monday, the 29th. And on October 3rd, live at Kean University, both at Kean University, we're doing this conversation with the candidates, this forum with Mikey Sherrill and Jack Ciattarelli on the stage, live audience, getting questions from them, which brings me to kind of where that race stands, because we're laser focused on two big races happening at the same time, the race for New York City mayor, and then, of course, the race for governor over in New Jersey, right? So let me bring into the conversation now Jim Vasil, who is our dedicated New Jersey reporter here, because, Jim, this is such an interesting race. Good to see you, by the way.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Dan. Appreciate it.
And before we get into the race, I do want to say, new dad alert, everybody. Congratulations to Jim Vasil. How's it going?
Thank you. Yeah, thankfully, thank God, I'm getting a lot of good sleep. Hudson's a really good sleeper, and
oh, sure,
he's
rub
about
it in.
to turn 3 months old.
Rub it in, Jim. All right, because I had a non-sleeper, so you're very lucky. All right, congratulations again to you and your wife too.
Thank you.
So let's talk about this race because it's very interesting. Rutgers University had a new poll come out, and we saw Jim kind of play out the last time. A tightening between Phil Murphy and Jack Ciattarelli. He won. Phil Murphy won, but it won by narrow margins here. And in this new Rutgers poll, 9% is what Mikey Sherrill leads by. Jack Ciattarelli really hoping he can close in on that. And then you look at what happened in the race for president. Donald Trump won New Jersey by a very slim margin as well, or a tighter margin than ever before. So what are you kind of looking at those numbers and thinking?
Well, it's not too surprising to look at those numbers, given the fact that there are so many new Republican voters who have registered to vote, who are new, who weren't previously Republicans, versus Democrats who are newly registered. I mean, New Jersey has obviously always been more of a blue-leaning state, but as you said, as evidenced by the presidential election and as evidenced by the 2021 gubernatorial election, where Jack Ciattarelli just narrowly lost to Phil Murphy. We're really seeing that difference now, and Republicans are certainly enjoying this new wave of new voters, if you will.
Yeah, and New Jersey is kind of very interesting because there's a lot of independent voters. There's undecideds right now in that Rutgers poll, and Jack Ciattarelli is really hoping that he can win some of these independent voters over to his side of things. And history kind of looks at it and whether or not there's a trend of Democrats continuing on or if Republicans eventually sneak their way in a state like New Jersey. But the president's paying very close attention to this race as well because it could really be a bellwether for what's going to play out around the country. That brings me to some of the big issues right now. Of course, you have your ear to the ground every single day. One of the biggest issues of this race is going to be taxes. So what are you hearing from voters?
Yeah, cutting taxes is something that is a promise that we see a lot of politicians make. It's an ambitious goal. There's plans on both sides of this race as far as cutting taxes. Obviously, Jack Ciattarelli said that he would cut the corporate business tax in half if elected, and Congresswoman Mikey Sherrill has said she would cut red tape for small businesses, make it easier to start a business. Cutting fees and things like that. So really, you're right. It is a good place to start for if you're an independent voter, and also the issue of electric bills, which I knew you were probably going to get to. But
Yeah.
that's I think is going to be a big one with independent voters. Not that it only affects them; it affects a lot. It affects almost everybody in the state, right? So we've seen kind of both candidates talk about what they plan to do with cutting back on energy costs. And Mikey Sherrill said on day one she's going to use her authority as governor to freeze utility costs. Now there's a little mystery as to how she can do that. We'll see if she gets that far. As far as Jack Ciattarelli, he wants to lean really back into getting more into natural gas, saying things like this clean energy, the renewable energy that we're seeing more of, like the
Yeah.
windmill stuff. That's something that he wants to move away from, pivot away from, and get New Jersey more power by getting back to natural gas. So it's interesting to see what both candidates are doing on that
Well,
front.
what's really interesting about what you just said, Jim, is something that kind of came out of that, which was Mikey Sherrill comes out and says, "Hey, I can do this. I can freeze or whatever it may be that she said, right?" But Phil Murphy, the current governor, was asked about that and didn't really support it. He was like, "I don't really know how she plans to do that." And there's been this kind of back and forth behind closed doors and rumor mills and speculation that Phil Murphy wasn't necessarily thrilled that Mikey Sherrill was running for governor. She originally wanted to run for Senate, and he told her allegedly to step aside so that his wife could run. And so did you see that? Did you think anything of it?
Well, Phil Murphy, to his credit, Governor Murphy has really, when we have his media gaggles with him, he's really kind of stayed out of this conversation. And as to your point, what he said about Mikey Sherrill, I believe he said he's not quite sure how she would
Yeah.
be able to do that as governor. But I know Mikey Sherrill's campaign said that she would work with the Board of Public Utilities to try to make that happen. But
Yeah.
like I said, to the governor's credit, he really is one who's really not really talk about this a lot.
Yeah. And which is very interesting because you would think that the sitting governor, who's a Democrat, would want to come out fully and support the Democrat. However, at the same time, Jack Ciattarelli is saying, well, look, you can vote for Mikey Sherrill, you can get a continuation of Phil Murphy. So she's doing this kind of delicate balance to not be a continuation of Phil Murphy for those independent voters.
And that's also not too surprising because back when in the senator race last year, he didn't. I don't believe he formally endorsed Andy Kim, and not that Andy Kim ended up needing it because he won by a pretty hefty margin. But that's another example of the governor kind of staying away from political races outside of his realm.
This is a great conversation to have because if you to the New Jersey folks, they're looking at it saying, "Well, why isn't he staying? Why isn't he? And there was a whole the Andy Kim thing was also a sore subject because his wife was running for Senate and then had to bow out. So that may have been why the whole Andy Kim thing kind of played out. But I want to ask you for the tax issue. For folks who are wondering, governors don't set the taxes, the property tax rates. That is, it's actually mayors and municipalities that set property taxes, and folks kind of get confused on this issue, saying, "Well, why can't the governor lower my taxes?" But that's something I keep asking the candidates. Well, if you pledge not to raise taxes or lower taxes, how do you plan to work with the municipalities to do it? And it's a whole kind of hand-in-hand approach that goes to your small business idea.
Yeah, I think that's something that that's going to have to happen once they're sworn in, and they're
Yeah.
just going to have to figure it out, right? And work with the legislature too, because they lean on their state legislators to go to their municipalities, the communities they serve, and try to lobby and talk and advocate for these things,
Yeah.
right? And to your point, you're right. I mean, that cutting taxes is one of the most ambitious things that we hear repeated among political candidates on both sides of the aisle, right? Both Democrats and Republicans. But is there a path to really lowering taxes in New Jersey? look at history. I mean, you're not going to bet against history, right?
Yeah.
It's more. It's a very ambitious goal for a reason.
No, I mean, even I just interviewed one of the candidates for Jersey City mayor and said to him, do you plan to not raise taxes? And he kind of gave a roundabout answer. And I said, so is that a pledge not to raise taxes? He's like, well, I plan to keep up with inflation. So there's this whole idea of you got to kind of keep up with where inflation's going. Jim, what else are you? I know your ears to the ground. What else are you hearing about this race?
Well, both candidates have really ramped up their campaigns. You saw Congresswoman Mikey Sherrill hold multiple events in the last couple of weeks. One was about how she plans to cut tape for red tape for small businesses, make it easier to start a business. Meanwhile, Jack Tittarelli's, making his rounds. He held a rally in Gloucester County not too long ago, and I believe he did a guest bartending spot down at the Jersey Shore.
Mm-hmm.
So, and both lieutenant governor candidates have been making their rounds as well. Also, PIX 11 plans on profiling both Dale Caldwell and Jim Gannon, the Democrat and Republicans, respectfully, candidates for lieutenant governor. Obviously, we have that debate coming up, but I plan on sitting down with both of these men, talking about the issues where, kind of not just to get a biography of their life, but also to talk about what they think the big issues are, and also how they see themselves successfully filling the role of lieutenant governor.
Yeah, you're doing that.
Yes.
Good. That's great, because it's important. And because people don't realize, I guess, the importance of the lieutenant governor. And unlike a race in New York where the lieutenant governor is its own item to vote for, in New Jersey, it's a joint ticket. And so go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, covering Pennsylvania, lieutenant governor it's a much more political thing, right? Because I remember when Governor Tom Wolf was in office, his lieutenant governor Mike Stack kind of left the fold due to a difference in opinions with the administration. And John Fetterman, who's now a U.S. senator, ended up becoming the lieutenant governor at that time. So it is interesting, but the lieutenant governor in New Jersey is responsible for overseeing the elections. It's not just a fancy title. It's not like many people dismiss vice president, if you will, or lieutenant governor. No, they have legitimate power in New Jersey, and it is something to take very seriously.
I'm not saying there was any scandal, but you also just look at the lieutenant governor is next in line. In New York, it played out in real time where Governor Cuomo stepped aside, lieutenant governor had to take over, and now she's the governor. Jim, always good to talk to you, my friend. I know you got a lot to cover today, so I'll let you go, but thanks for joining us today. Thank you to Jim for what he does each and every day, and stay tuned for those two big interviews that he's doing with the lieutenant governor candidates. We're going to air those leading up, of course, to the big debate that we're airing on September 29th live from Kean University. That'll do it for today for PIX on Politics, everybody. I will see you back here tomorrow. Enjoy.